Wrestling. Dave Brown right along ringside. By golly, we're about ready to go with more big action.
Thank you very much, and welcome to Georgia Championship Wrestling. I'm Gordon Soler, your host, and we have quite an hour in store for us.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Championship Wrestling at ringside. This is Vince McMahon, along with wrestling's only living legend, Bruno Sammartino.
Welcome to this week's edition of Mid-South Wrestling Television. I'm your host, Boyd Pierce, another outstanding card.
Hey, guys, and welcome back to the Regional Rasslin Podcast, where we talk the territories. I am Ray Russell, and this week we go back to Chicago, Chi-Town, if you will, the Windy City for more Chicago Wrestling Club of the 1960s. And we're going to be talking to a man who has not only studied the history of the Chicago Wrestling Club, but he was also a fan. And he shares the memories with us today as we continue to tell that story year by year. This year, looking at more of the late 1960s. And we're going to bring the man on right now. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back. He is pro wrestling historian, pro wrestling superfan, Chicago wrestling superfan, and an all-around great guy. He is the one and only Mr. Richard Vicek. Welcome back to the program, Richard.
Nice to be here again, Ray. And I'm going to tell people about the Chicago Wrestling Club 1967.
1967 is what we're going to kick off with. We left off with 66, so it only makes sense. I hope you guys had a chance to check that out. If you didn't, go back into the archives just a few episodes ago. Richard joined us for 1966, the first year of Chicago Wrestling Club, and we're getting ready to move on now. So we'll get you going here, Richard. I know you're a busy man. You got things to do, but this is number one on the list for today anyway, hopefully. And we're going to get into
Very good.
1960 Chicago Wrestling. Let's do it.
Yes, there were 17 cards that year.
Wow. Okay.
And I admit I did not attend a live card that year.
Okay.
But I talked to Richard Tito, my fellow Chicagoan, about this, who attended almost all of the 262 Chicago wrestling cards from 1966 to 1983.
Okay.
He actually lived probably about 2 miles from the amphitheater, and that really was advantageous for him. He called 67 maybe the greatest year for talent in the AWA. And by now, the wrestling club was sharing the building with a new NBA basketball franchise, the Chicago Bulls.
I think I heard of those guys.
Yes. So the first card was Friday, January 6, 1967.
Okay.
We have a title change for the AWA tag title in Chicago. Usually that took place in the Twin Cities. But that night, Larry Hennig and Harley Race beat Bruiser Da Crusher to win the AWA tag title. And I used to consider, and I still do, that to be the best tag team feud for the Chicago Wrestling Club in the 1960s.
Well,
George Shire also agrees about how important that was for the AWA in general. But also on this card, we had Killer Kowalski beating Verne Gagne on disqualification, Reg Parks over the Alaskan. Jack Lanza continues to get a big push here, defeating Big K. And we had Chris Markoff over Doug Gilbert, and the Assassin Joe Tommaso drew Santiago Acosta.
Oh, very good. So I'm looking back at this, and like you said, there weren't a lot of title changes outside of the Minnesota world for the AWA, but with Verne being a shareholder here in Chicago, and with the Bruiser being a shareholder here in Chicago, I'm sure they decided they could make this work here. Just another way to continue to bring the fans in. There could be championship title changes here in the Windy City, if you will.
Yes. The next card was Friday, January 27th, was canceled due to the blizzard of 1967. This was a serious deal in Chicago with 60 dead,
wow.
23 inches of snow in 24 hours, 20,000 cars stuck. I looked this up for all the facts. You know, they would push the matches to the next card coming up. But this weather was so bad that the next night's card in Indianapolis, January 28th, was also canceled due to weather. Yes.
Sounds like the weather was a lot larger than just the Chicago area.
Yes, for sure. So anyway, they rescheduled the card on February 2nd, 1967. And AWA champion Mad Dog Vachon versus Killer Kowalski was a no contest. Verne Gagne beat Reggie Parks. We have a debut tag team here. The Devil's Duo, Angelo Poffo and Chris Markoff, defeated Babyface Jack Lanza and Wilbur Snyder. This was their debut in Chicago, and they're managed by Pretty Boy Bobby Heenan. They were already WWA tag champs in Indianapolis. Poffo said that Wilbur didn't like the idea of an Italian with bleached hair.
Okay.
But, that was told to me by Lanny years later.
All right, fair enough.
But also on the card, Mitsu beat Doug Gilbert. The Alaskan beat Prince Pullens and Moose Cholak over Joe Tommaso.
I go back to the Devil's Duo just really quickly, and we covered the ICW extensively here on Regional Rasslin. Me and Steve Crawford just finished that up. And, of course, the Devil's Duo of Doug Vines and Jeff Sword roll through there, but it's promoted by Angelo Poffo, and we would find out time and time again throughout that ICW era that Angelo Poffo would recycle names and gimmicks and things for his shows that, that maybe he or someone else had used in years prior. That there you go, the Devil's Duo born right there with Markoff and Poffo. And yes, you're absolutely correct. We covered them quite a bit in the 66 run, but both guys singles talents then. But now under the tutelage of Pretty Boy, Bobby Heenan. I like it. By
the way, this year there's a lot of Friday and nights, I guess Saturday with the Bulls.
Yes.
That would provide some competition. Monday, February 20th, 1967, Mad Dog Vachon, who's the champion, defeats Verne Gagne on disqualification. Dick the Bruiser and the Crusher ended up with a no contest against the Devil's Duo. Bruiser's payoff was $550, and his dividend profits from the operation was $1,800. Wow. This isn't always declared on Bruiser's calendar, and I could only presume that it was declared on his taxes.
Well, that's a bold
because some nights the dividend was bigger than the payoff.
Yeah, correct.
On this same card, Bruiser beat the Mongol. Now, this Mongol was not the El Mongol of Atlanta.
Right.
But he was a part-time mid-carder from the WWA, the Mongol, who had been on the cover of Wrestling Life magazine. He performed on the WWA Victory Field card, and there were stories on him in various wrestling review issues in the 1960s.
Okay.
But he had a real job. He was a full-time U.S. Customs agent with his real name was Simeon Ardelian. And I learned this because my cousin Art, he knew I'd like wrestling. He goes, Did you ever remember something, the Mongol? And so I started looking up. I found these articles. And he goes, oh, yeah, he was a U.S. Customs agent until he passed away in 1986. But just like so many wrestlers that I bring up over the years, they had a real job.
Right.
Yeah, Larry Hennig and Mad Dog Vachon, they were hired up in the car to get the big bucks.
Right.
Anyway, also on this card, Jack Lanza drew Moose Cholak. Lanza's on his way up. Mitsu Arakawa over Reggie Parks. And a new performer, Guy Heenan, beat Jose Betancourt. Guy Heenan was assassin number 2, Guy Mitchell, also Gentleman Jerry Valiant, and over the years, and he portrayed the older brother of Bobby Heenan.
Wow, talk about Heenan clearly, Bobby Heenan, a year in the business or whatever, clearly already generating enough heat that he can have quote unquote family members. And just by the last name alone, they're drawing heat. That's insane how good Bobby Heenan was right from the jump.
And before the next Chicago card, we had an AWA title change in St. Paul, Minnesota on February 26, where Verne Gagne defeated Mad Dog Vachon for the title. And he would hold the title for 558 days. So Verne is back in the driver's seat.
Let me ask you a question real quick about that last card, Richard, before you move on. The Lanza going to a draw with Moose Cholak was a huge deal, especially for Chicago. Moose Cholak, basically a Chicago native. So Lanza, like you had mentioned it briefly there, but he's moving up the card. Just doing a draw, going to a draw with Cholak was a huge deal for Lanza moving forward.
Yes, and he's still Jack Lanza.
Right, correct.
The former Minneapolis sociology teacher.
Wow.
Yes. Yeah. So here's the next big one. Saturday, March 11th, 1967. It was the first sellout for the Chicago Wrestling Club in its short life. 9,782 fans paid over $27,000 at the box office for this. It had one of the most unique lineups, which I will tell you about. Well, first of all, AWA tag champions Hennig and Race went to a no contest against Bruiser Da Crusher. When you have a big 27,000 plus house, Bruiser's payoff was $1,600 and his dividend was $1,800. And Verne Gagne was also on the card, defeating Pat O'Connor. Bob Luce had a wide-angle panoramic photo of the entire crowd that night. He would use that in future programs. Now, this card had a very unusual lineup. Lou Thez beat Bob Geigel. Reggie Parks drew Killer Kowalski. Johnny Valentine beat Florida's Eddie Graham. And Dory Funk Sr. drew Joe Blanchard. There must have been a wrestling promoters meeting around this time.
You would have to think.
Keigel's from Kansas City, Graham's from Tampa, Funk, Amarillo, Blanchard, San Antonio. I never remember this in any other territory.
I was going to say, there's a lot of NWA guys here.
Yes. So Gagne was obviously on speaking terms with these guys.
Right.
Now, you may notice Wilbur was not on this card, but he was teaming with Lanza in Elkhart, Indiana, against the Devil's Duo, where the Devil's Duo won.
All right. That does, absolutely. It's like a super card, really, when you're bringing in these guys from all these other territories. Now, I'm not saying the Chicago fans knew of some of these names, but we know it's a who's who. Certainly, and like you pointed out, these are not just wrestlers of the day. These are promoters. So there were certainly some discussions going on there. And we know Verne would attend the NWA meetings as well. So I can see why they kind of worked loosely together still.
So that was certainly a milestone, the first sellout.
I looked at you have the box office here, 27,579. I did a quick inflation. That's over $200,000 in today's money. So nearly $250,000 gate. In 1960s wrestling, that's a huge deal. And that's a sellout. Yeah, that's the first sellout. And it won't be the last.
April 15th, 1967, they have their second sellout at the Chicago Wrestling Club. Now it's 10,735 fans. And I always wonder, how did they squeeze 1,000
extra
thousands in the building?
Money talks, Richard.
I should compare those wide angle shots of the crowd on that. Well, I think they just open up more seats on the main floor, on the arena floor there.
Right.
And again, Hennig and Race, they defeated Bruiser and Crusher via disqualification. Bruiser had the $1,600 payoff and $1,800 dividend again. Wow. Yes. We had Wilbur over Killer Kowalski. Moose Cholak beat Reg Parks. Chris Markoff beat Jack Lanza.
Okay.
But Lanza is solidly getting better opponents each card. And we had Mitsu over Prince Poems, and Guy Heenan wrestled here, defeating Santiago Acosta, and he would wrestle 3 more times in Chicago as Guy Heenan.
Wow, they don't keep that around very long then, the Guy Heenan gimmick? Just long enough?
He was the hardest guy for me to track down during the Bruiser book.
Okay.
And I eventually talked to the wife and the son. But I would have had so many questions for Heenan, Guy Heenan, or John Steele Hill, who was the Stomper, the Strangler, Assassin number 2, and Jerry Valiant. There's probably others I don't know about.
Seems like it. When you got those many identities, there's probably a few more somewhere.
Yeah. Okay, the next card was May 5th, 1967. AWA champion Verne Gagne defeated Mad Dog Vachon, the man who took the belt from. So, and that was the first time. That was a big match with Mad Dog. The next on the card, the Devils duo, Poffo and Markoff, defeated Ernie Ladd and Earl Maynard via disqualification. Maynard was a bodybuilder from Barbados who is now 90 years old and still living. And those two guys would team a few more times at the amphitheater. You know, I learned recently that Ernie Ladd was originally drafted by the Chicago Bears in 1961, but he chose to go with San Diego of the AFL.
Well, it worked out for him.
Yes, it did. Also on this card, Wilbur Snyder beat the Assassin, Mitsu beat Jack Lanza, Moose over Guy Heenan, Joe Tommaso defeated Jose Betancourt on the opening bout. Okay. Now, Bruiser would get money, get some type of payout for his ownership stake.
Right.
It used to be, for this night, it was $100. And they would get sometimes as much, but these are the 3 owners, as much as 1.5% of the box office when they were wrestling elsewhere. And of course, the best example of this in the business was Gorilla Monsoon, who got preliminary money on every WWF card until his death.
Gorilla knew what he was doing when he put that together. Yeah. Not, these here guys getting residuals for certain things, and you didn't know if it would work out, but it works out in their favor. And Gorilla was really wise to that. But that's an excellent point that Bruiser's not just a wrestler here. He's a promoter, so he's getting paid whether he works or not. And either he takes the night off, or like you said, he can go work another territory and get paid there as well.
And he was a frequent visitor in St. Louis for Sam Muchnick during these years. And okay, so our next card is June 2nd, 1967. The Devils duo are back in the main event, beating Bruiser and Crusher. Bruiser got a $700 payoff and a $1,000 dividend. You know, that sort of reflects the crowds weren't as up as those sellouts. You know, because the more you gross, the more everybody makes.
Sure.
That's still not a shabby payoff and dividend.
No.
when
you do the inflation, that's pretty damn good.
Yeah. Also on the card, Wilbur drew Johnny Powers, who was new to the Chicago market. He was from Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. In the interview for the Bruiser book, I got to interview Powers. This was probably 15 years ago. And he said he liked discussing the wrestling promotion business, you know, from a business standpoint, frequently with Bruiser.
Imagine that, and what Johnny Powers would go on to do in Cleveland.
Yeah, you know, he's picking his brain. You know, Powers was a young guy then.
Yeah.
And, he knew who to talk to. And I remember him saying, you know, we would forever be puzzled. Why do some cards are sellouts and why others we get 40% of a house? You know, it takes a lot of an analysis of the matchmaking and the storylines.
Sure.
But I considered Powers to be one of the quickest developing main event stars of the 1960s.
Undoubtedly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, also on this card, Johnny Valentine was a no contest against Earl Maynard. We had the midgets on the card, Cowboy Bradley and Little Beaver versus Jack Cassidy and Sky Lolo for the first time. Jack Lanza drew Reggie Parks, and Mitsu beat Doug Gilbert. And you just look at the caliber of the wrestlers in the preliminary matches.
Yeah, you can see it. I mean, if you're going to call Earl Maynard preliminary, I mean, just to look alone, but Reg Parks and Gashouse Gilbert and guys like that, you're absolutely right. You know every name on the card.
Mm-hmm. 23rd, 1967, AWA champion Verne Gagne beat Mitsu Arakawa on disqualification. And this was one of two main events with Mitsu, and it shows how the owners respected Mitsu as a performer in the evil Japanese role.
Right.
In fact, he was, for a time, the WWA champion in Indianapolis. Mm-hmm. So it showed how much Dick and Wilbur thought of him.
Absolutely.
Also on the card, the Devils duo beat Ladd and Maynard. A no contest resulted with Johnny Powers and Wilbur Snyder. Lou Thez beat Mooch Cholak. Johnny Valentine beat Guy Heenan, and Lanza beat the Assassin, presumably number one. And Lanza was paying his dues.
Sure.
And he would later earn the singles title in the WWA and the WWA tag title, and so he's well on his way to stardom. Okay, let's go to July 7th, 1967, and we had the rematch with Gagne over Mitsu Arakawa. Mitsu had a great career starting out on the Dumont TV network, wrestled in New Mexico, Calgary, Amarillo, San Francisco, Winnipeg, Omaha. He wrestled in the Indianapolis, Cincinnati territory of Jim Barnett in the AWA, Detroit for the Sheik, and the WWF.
That's right. Yeah.
So, I mean,
talk about making the rounds. Yeah. Like you said, there was respect there, not just for the gimmick, but the man, obviously, and he could do good business. And so here's his opportunity in Chicago, back-to-back main events.
Yes. Also on the card, Bruiser beat Harley Race. Bruiser got a $576 payoff and $100 in transit cash.
Transit cash? That's new.
Yeah, it is. Although I could see he may not write everything down.
I was wondering how much exactly was gas back in 1960, $100.
Oh, it was in cents. It was cents. And most of his calendar, you see a little note that would say AA 445.
Okay.
Or DEL for Delta. So he's getting reimbursed for the airline.
Gotcha.
Yes. We would next match the Devils duel would defeat Rene Goulet and Jack Lanza. And those guys would also later stop in the WWA and the WWF. Mm-hmm. Lou Thez beat Johnny Powers. Moose Cholak drew Ernie Ladd, and the Assassin beat Jack Kane. Interesting story I just learned last week. Okay. Powers had a very short run in the AWA after, striking it big so quickly. George Shire tells me that Verne asked him, on future cards, I want you to discontinue the use of your power lock, which was a figure four late lock.
Right, yeah.
Because I'm bringing back Dick Beyer, the Destroyer, to the card. That's his key hold. Yeah. So I don't want you to be doing the same hold on these cards where Dick Beyer is getting a big push. Wow. Well, that led to Powers leaving the promotion. He obviously had enough talent and drawing power to move elsewhere.
Well, he certainly does. As we know, he'll become a superstar in the Cleveland territory not too long after this.
Yes. So the next night we have the next card, July 28th, 1967. Verne Gagne defeated, who's the champion, went to a no contest against Lou Thez, who was brought in. Thez was no longer the NWA champion.
Right.
So these legends battle again, but now Verne is in charge of things.
Right. He's the promoter and the champion.
We'll remember that the next card. The Devils duo were victorious over Bruiser and Crusher via disqualification, and Wilbur Snyder and the Destroyer ended in a double disqualification. This was the Destroyer's first time in 1967, and around this time, and he had been on the cover of Wrestling World magazine the previous year. Mm-hmm. It's one of the best wrestling covers of all time. Anyway, Johnny Valentine again beat Rene Goulet. Lanza drew Johnny Powers. That's a good way of continuing to set up progress by Lanza. And we had women, Cora Combs beat Sarah Shawn on the opener.
Okay.
That night on July 28, 1967. So next we go to August 11th, 1967. They brought back Luthez again, and Verne finally put him away. It was the final match of this short program. Probably no hair pulling or fists, I would think.
At least not in the ring.
Yes. The next bout was interesting. Heel versus heel. Paffo and Markov beat Hennig and Race via disqualification. And that's unusual when you have two heel teams.
You have to wonder if the fans were cheering for anybody in that outcome or what the situation was there. But no, I figured that would go to a no contest or something along those lines, given the teams involved.
Yes.
I wish we could go back in time and get some information on the finish to that one.
Bruiser beat Johnny Valentine that night. Wilbur Snyder defeated Blackjack Lanza on disqualification. And this is the first time in Chicago that Lanza is tagged as Blackjack. In Elkhart, Indiana, in previous months, Lanza turned on his tag team partner, Wilbur Snyder, in Elkhart.
Okay.
And Bruiser and Snyder allowed Lanza to turn heel in the WWA. Lanza told me for an interview, Gagne didn't want him to turn heel in the AWA.
Huh.
But now, managed by pretty boy Bobby Heenan, John Lanzo, that's his real name, made history, managed by Bobby Heenan.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to be with the Blackjacks for quite a while moving forward, as Bobby Heenan. So it all begins right here with the Blackjack Lanza, the heel turn, and I think over Snyder getting a little revenge here because, as you mentioned, Lanza had turned on Snyder in Elkhart. And here's a little bit of a revenge, I guess, in Chicago, you could say. Snyder over Lanza under disqualification.
Yes. The Destroyer was brought back victorious over Eddie Sharkey, and Rene Goulet beat the Assassin. So now we're already into September. On September 2nd, 1967, Bruiser and Crusher defeated Paffo and Markov. And they brought back Johnny Powers again. Snyder defeated him. You know, that's probably good booking since Powers is going to be heading out soon.
Right.
And the Destroyer, we're starting a string of victories with him as he defeats Reggie Parks. Rene Goulet drew Blackjack Lanza, Moose Cholak over Jack Pesek, and Big K beat Al Casey.
Big K, Stan Kowalski scoring a win in the opener there.
Yes.
It's nice that Johnny Powers is doing the right thing on the way out, doing the job to Wilbur Snyder. I'm sure he got a decent payday working Wilbur near the top semi-main event. And we're coming out of that two-match series between Verne Gagne and Luthez. I love that they did the no contest to bring it back to try to draw in a few more fans there in August. And by September, we're back to a tag team main event. And I'm curious to see where we go from here.
Yes. On next card, September 16th, 1967, AWA champions Hennig and Race defeated Bruiser and the Crusher. We had Wilbur Snyder defeating Angelo Paffo, a matchup that probably happened hundreds of times over the past 15 years. All across the country. They were expert dancers.
Apparently so, if they can bring it back that many times. Snyder and Paffo, okay, very good.
Yes. Johnny Valentine beat Moose on disqualification. They brought back the Destroyer, defeating Rene Goulet, who's a solid mid-card wrestler at the time. Something's in the works here.
Yeah, Destroyer racking up the wins quietly here.
We had Dr. Moto, who was Mitsu Arakawa's tag team partner, defeat Bob Boyer. And this was the Chicago debut for Bob Boyer. And he would later be known as Chief Bobby Bold Eagle in the WWA. In fact, he would tell me for his Bold Eagle character, he would, as Bob Boyer, with no makeup, face paint on,
right,
he would referee the first 2 matches at a WWA spot show. Go in the dressing room, put on his headdress and his face paint, and wrestle later on the card.
Wow.
And nobody would know the difference.
Nobody suspected a thing. Let me ask you a question, Dr. Moto. Is that the same as, is that Mr. Moto, or is this a different Moto?
No, that is Tor Kamada.
Oh, okay. This Dr. Moto's Tor Kamada. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
This is not Charlie Moto. Is that who you were thinking of?
Yes.
Of Los Angeles fame?
Correct,
yes.
Yeah.
And of course, Blackjack Lanza beat Al Cashy on the opener here. But like I said, Lanza's getting a lot of exposure now. And let's go to next card, October 21st, 1967. Big main event. AWA champion Verne Gagne beat to the Destroyer. And we're going to talk more about this, but also on the card, Wilbur Snyder and Pat O'Connor beat Hennig and Race on disqualification. We'll hear about O'Connor and Snyder on the next card. And also on the card, Rene Goulet beat Igor Volkov, Lanza over Reg Parks, Moose Cholak over Bob Boyer, and Ramon Torres beat the Assassin. Now, I mentioned the Destroyer. This was the last time that the Destroyer would wrestle for the Chicago Wrestling Club. Both him and Gagne told a story that after this match, they visited the Playboy Club on North Michigan Avenue in Chicago. Okay. Verne suggested that Boyer be known as Dr. X going forward. Change his identity, because eventually if Boyer lost a match and lost his match as Dr. X, he still had the Destroyer gimmick to use elsewhere.
Right.
So next on AWA TV, Dr. X sat in the studio in Minneapolis wearing his mask, watching the bouts. And the announcer goes, "Who's that guy with the mask? What's this?" Well, he eventually interfered with Gagne's TV match. And this was among the best publicity stunts in the entire history of the AWA, in my opinion. I think of some of the stunts that would come in future years.
Sure.
You may remember when Ray Stevens smashed a trophy awarded to the Heenan family.
Right.
Or, there were arm wrestling matches involving Koloff, Billy Graham, and the Crusher. Or Heenan demolishing Rock and Roll Zumhoff's boombox.
Right.
But this thing with Dr. X sitting in the audience, that was one of the top publicity stunts. And I think those two guys, Gagne and Dr. X, were a perfect match in the ring.
Yeah, they both have the amazing amateur backgrounds, obviously, Boyer and Gagne, but they both were amazing talents when they were hitting their stride and in their prime. Even watching early 70s Destroyer in Japan, we've had a fantastic time on the Pro Wrestling Academy podcast that we do. So, yeah, and seeing Verne, early Verne, or younger Verne anyway, he could really go. And so to have these guys out there main eventing, I could only imagine the quality they were giving the fans.
Now we're going to jump to one of the most interesting cards of the 1960s in Chicago, not just 1967. Here's basically the background story, and this is the storyline, okay?
This is leading into the November 3rd card, just to clarify.
Yes. Larry Hennig injured his knee in a match, and he could not continue as half of the tag team champions with Race.
Okay.
The AWA allowed Race to select a substitute partner. He picked Chris Markoff to be his partner. Well, on that card on November 3rd, 1967, Pat O'Connor and Wilbur Snyder defeated Hennig and Markoff to win the AWA tag title.
All right.
Markoff was the pinch hitter for Hennig. O'Connor and Snyder won the belts, but they would not defend the belts around the circuit. I learned that afterwards, researching Cage Match and Wilbur's record book. Hey, how come he's not wrestling? So we'll find out the answer to that real soon. Okay. But on this card, Dr. X beat the Crusher. How much can you get over in Chicago?
I'm telling you,
if you defeat the Crusher?
Yeah.
And of course, they're prepping for future title shots against Verne. Mm-hmm. We had a new team debut in Chicago that night. Mitsu Arakawa and Dr. Moto defeated Ramon Torres and San Diego Acosta. This injury with Hennig was a blessing in disguise for Arakawa and Moto. They were already the WWA Tag Championships in Indianapolis, beating Bruiser and Crusher. And if you ask me now, they were probably the best candidates to be the prime heel tag team in the AWA. Also on the card, Blackjack Lanza over Rene Goulet. And we have another edition. Go ahead.
Well, I was reading your results. Rogowski over the George Gadaski here, and I let you tell the listeners out there who Rock would go on to become.
Ole Anderson. And he had some training influence by Verne Gagne. In fact, in the program book, because he was stocky with a crew cut, they claim he was a distant relative of Dick the Bruiser.
I can see that.
Yeah. Bruiser was not on this card this night, as he was in a handicap match in St. Louis against John Paul Hennig and Eduardo Carpentier.
Wow.
Yeah. The results of that tag team change was actually in the Chicago Tribune the next day. There were 6,900 fans there that night. So that was maybe 60% of the house. So now we have new tag team champions. That must have been a scheduling nightmare, because Bruiser and Gagne had to probably sit down 6 months in advance with a calendar. He says, okay, I'm in Chicago on these dates. Right. I want Moto and Arakawa. And I'm doing Indianapolis here on the third Tuesday or whatever.
Right.
So that one, when you have someone as two guys, the tag champs of that, you have to cover two
separate
territories for the lack of a better word.
Yeah.
But that lasted for almost a year like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
The Hennig injury was a legit injury for anybody curious. It wasn't like a work deal just because they didn't want to drop the belts, racing Hennig or whatever the storyline was. Hennig was actually injured.
Yes. Now, what Larry said in a shoot interview decades later, he claimed that Verne Gagne came to the hospital bed and said, "You're flying to Chicago with me now, and so Harley can drop the belt." Well, Rich Tito was there that night. Hennig was not at ringside on crutches. But, that's urban legend, and that's why I called it urban legend. But this next card, December 2nd, 1967, wasn't too shabby either, because we have Dr. X defeating Dick the Bruiser, setting up future title bouts with Verne. Bruiser's payoff was $1,100.
He earned his loss that night.
Yes. And also on that card, we had an AWA tag title change, as Arakawa and Moto defeated Snyder and O'Connor. I always giggled, the program book used the headline word Jets.
Right.
You couldn't say Jets.
No, that's
in fact, when Brute in his booking sheet, when he would have little short names for the opponents, and it'd be Jets.
Okay, well, I mean, shorthand, I guess, back in the day.
Brew and Crew versus Bruiser and Crusher.
Brew and Crew, I like that.
Champions now. And we have another debut in Chicago. Mighty Igor Vodek,
Yeah.
also known as Dick Garza from Detroit. And this is I guess, a Polish refugee character.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't talk, but if fans would bring him candy bars and his face would light up. Anyway, Blackjack Lanza drew Moose Cholak, Harley back getting some action again, defeating Jack Pesek. Another debut this night, Cowboy Bill Watts, a new arrival in the AWA. The program had a long profile, allegedly written by Watts himself. It was probably written by Bob Luce, but the Watts touted his University of Oklahoma football career. He did it on TV interviews too. And his head football coach was Bud Wilkinson, who had 3 NCAA number 1 football teams in the 1950s. So that's a big addition to the schedule and the roster now, because we have Bill Watts as a good guy.
So we have Bill Watts coming in. Jack Lanza is now Blackjack Lanza. We can see all these pieces in place. Hennig gets hurt, so now Arakawa and Moto are the next team up. We've got a lot of things going on, and Dr. X has defeated the Crusher and the Bruiser. So we know he's got stardom coming his way as far as the main event scene goes. So they're really building towards 1968 and doing a fantastic job with the talent.
Yes, they are. The final card of the year was December 30th, 1967. Bruiser and Dr. X was a no contest. Bruiser got $13.50 for a payoff.
Not shabby.
And the AWA champions, Moto and Arakawa, defeated Rogowski and Bill Watts.
It's
it's
an
interesting. Both
team.
guys would later become bookers in Southern Territories.
And promoters, yes.
Yes. So we had Pat O'Connor defeating Johnny Powers on disqualification. Joe Scarpello beat Guy Mitchell. That was the Guy Heenan character.
Right. I wonder if they did explain why his name changed like this in the same fiscal year.
Yeah. That's, by the way, Scarpello was an NCAA wrestling champ from the University of Iowa. Verne always liked those amateur guys.
Absolutely.
Brad Ringens, we had Bob Geigel back over Dennis Hall and Jose Betancourt over Bob Boyer. So the second year at the Chicago Wrestling Club was definitely a financial success and a success for creative results.
Right.
They would share the International Amphitheater for one more year with the Chicago Bulls. Boy, I have here in our notes, you see this, $3 for a Bulls ticket.
Wow.
Of course,
I'm assuming they charged a little more by the time Michael Jordan got there.
Yes.
Oh, man. Well, they weren't just running shows here in Chicago. They were testing out future stars, building up talent that would, go on to become famous and infamous, whatever the case may be. 1967 was a hell of a year. And they were selling out here in 67, but they're really building towards the future. So that was a fantastic year in the history of the Chicago Wrestling Club. But guys, I got news for you. We're going to continue on telling the story of Chicago wrestling right here this week with 1968. And we're going to take a really quick commercial timeout. But Richard, I invite you to stay with me and we'll be back on the other side. Thanks, Richard.
Good.
Relive the glory days of Memphis wrestling with the Retro Wrestling Review USWA podcast. Each week, we go back in time to review USWA Championship Wrestling from the 1990s, episode by episode. Join us for watch-alongs, behind-the-scenes stories, and exclusive interviews with people who were there and lived it. Whether you grew up watching it or you're discovering it for the first time, this podcast is your ringside seat to Memphis wrestling history. It's all a part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Listen now at USWApodcast.com.
Hey guys, Ray Russell here. Lots of new stuff happening here at WrestleCopia, and I want to update you on everything going on with the brand right now. First and simple, if you haven't checked out our website at WrestleCopia.com, it's a great way to keep up with the latest episodes of all of your favorite Copia programming, from the Wrestling Memory Grenade to Regional Rasslin with the Territory Talk, the Wrestling Stoop with the legendary Bob Roop, Professor Dan Ginnity and the Pro Wrestling Academy, and all the other great podcasts from Gene Jackson, Bob Smith, Dave Dynasty, and the boys from the Other Ship. And of course, all of those programs also available at your favorite podcast streaming platforms. And if you want to stay up to date with everything going on in the Copia world, all the latest news, random thoughts, fun videos, pictures, and more, make sure to join the more than 33,000 followers over at facebook.com/WrestlingGrenade. Don't be left out. Please also follow us at the former Twitter, now X, at Wrestling Grenade, and subscribe to youtube.com/WrestlingGrenade. Would also greatly appreciate you leaving us a 5-star review at your favorite podcast apps, guys, because every positive review makes our podcasts more visible in the algorithms, if you will, which allows us to continue to grow. Now, for those who have been asking about merchandise, WrestleCopia merch, you can find plenty of designs for our t-shirts, hats, magnets, stickers, coffee mugs, and more over at the TeePublic store. That is tpublic.com/user/WrestleCopia. And last but definitely not least, it's what keeps the entire machine going. I'm talking about patreon.com/WrestleCopia. Now with 3 major tiers and tons of Patreon exclusive next level content for our supporters. Remember guys, no subscription, cancel any time, but I think you'll like the content that we're offering there for any budget you may have. And you can sign up right now, patreon.com/WrestleCopia. We appreciate your support in helping us pay the bills to keep the WrestleCopia Podcast Network running and enabling us to continue to bring you all the quality programming that we offer.
Hey, it's Bob Smith, and guess what? The Outdated Wrestling Hour is now part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. But hey, no fear, you're still going to hear the unique guests, comedy, music, authors, journalists, funny people. Who knows who's going to end up on the Outdated Wrestling Hour? Remember, it's all new and all old. So check it out in the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and wherever you get your podcasts. Listen if you know what's good for you.
All right, guys, welcome back to Regional Rasslin. Continuing on the story, the Chicago Wrestling Club right here in the 1960s just wrapped up 67, moving into the new year of 1968. Lots of new stars established, storylines, and we've got some new main eventers. Dr. X is in town, and of course, Richard Vicek is still with us, so we're going to continue on that story now, looking at January 1968.
Thank you, Ray Russell. Next, first card here, January 27, 1968. Dr. X beat Verne Gagne, who was the AWA champion, via disqualification. They had 2 matches, and this was definitely the #1 singles feud in the Chicago Wrestling Club in the 1960s. And they had 7 other AWA bouts around the circuit. Mm-hmm. There was great heat by both guys, provocative Dr. X rhetoric, and, of course, his publicity stunt, sitting in the audience and then interfering. That was just classic.
Yeah, I mean, you didn't see storylines that developed back then very often, or angles, if you will. And that was 1967 really built the stars and things for 1968. We're going to cash in on those investments here, but none bigger than the publicity stunt and all the heat. Literally off the charts here for Verne Gagne and Dr. X. Excellent job in getting this whole feud going while Dr. X is going over on Crusher and Bruiser. It's not really just a feud. It's really the attraction, I feel like, that's going to bring the people in. It's not just, oh, we got a big title match. It's, I want to see Verne get some revenge on this guy.
Yes. On the AWA tag team front, Moto and Arakawa beat O'Connor and Snyder, a rematch from the December 2nd card on this. So they're starting to establish their reputation at the Chicago Wrestling Club.
Right. It's not just a fluke. They've beat O'Connor and Snyder twice now. So very, very good establishing them.
Blackjack Lanza beat Rogowski, and the Mighty Igor beat Bob Geigel. Moose Cholak beat San Diego Acosta, and Paul Christie, a local Chicagoan, drew Eddie Sharkey. This was the debut of Paul Christie at the Chicago Wrestling Club. You know, in his autobiography, he would gripe about his low status starting at the Chicago Wrestling Club. But he would keep at this, and eventually he would share the WWA tag title with Wilbur in very short years. Very soon he would progress to that level. And of course, he would be in main events against Bruiser in the late 1970s. But this was the first time for Paul Golden Boy Christie.
Golden Boy.
He did not have his valet lady manager yet.
No Bunny Love?
Yeah.
I wonder if he was doing magic tricks yet, Paul Christie. I don't know.
Oh, but yeah, Bunny was still probably in grammar school.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, this was well before that.
That checks out.
Okay, then the next match is in Chicago, March 5th, 1968. We would have the first of 4 tag title bouts. Dick the Bruiser and the Crusher versus Arakawa and Moto. This started a monster feud. Bruiser's payoff was $17.50, so they must have had this was the payoff that's very close to those sellouts last year.
So you have notes here. One of 4 tag bouts between these two teams, and we kick it all off with a no contest between the two, which makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Bill Watts defeated Dr. X, and it was one of 3 bouts they had in Chicago that year.
Okay.
Blackjack Lanza, there was a no contest against Wilbur, as Lanza continues to be built up, and we'll see what happens with him in the summertime.
Okay.
We had Mighty Igor against Mark Starr, Mad Dog Vachon over Paul Christie. I'm sure Mad Dog was ruthless with newcomer Paul Christie, and Paul Christie went home that night with some gouges and scratches on his back.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we have a new addition to this card. Dutch Savage beat Prince Owens. This is the Dutch Savage from Portland.
Very cool.
And during my interview with him, Savage was very complimentary of the wrestling ability of Wilbur Snyder, saying Wilbur could have a great match with a broomstick. So anyway, Savage would have a short run in the AWA. Of course, he would make his mark in the Portland territory. Right. Yeah. Okay, now we go to March 23rd, 1968. In the main event, Bill Watts beat Dr. X on a disqualification.
All right.
This was their second of 3 matches. The AWA tag champs, Moto and Arakawa, beat Mighty Igor and Luke Brown.
This would be of the Kentuckians fame, Luke Brown?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Grizzly Smith's partner.
Right.
In other territories.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, on this night, Crusher went to a no contest against Blackjack Lanza, further building up Lanza for future and better things.
Mm-hmm.
We had Wilbur Snyder beat Big K. The midgets were back. Sonny Boy Cassidy, Irish Jackie against Little Brutus and Sky Lolo. Second time for midgets. Unfortunately, none of those midgets are still with us.
Right.
Yeah, which is the case for most of the people on these cards.
Yeah.
The ones I've mentioned this year, the only ones that's still living, to my knowledge, is Bill Watts.
Yeah. Cowboy.
So that's just life now when you look at old school wrestling. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Paul Christie beat Johnny Case in the opening bout.
All right.
Yes. Okay, now we're going to have another rematch between Watts and Dr. X. This is on April 13th, 1968 at the amphitheater. And Watts won on disqualification.
That is 3 wins for the Cowboy over Dr. Now, he's not really scoring pinfalls here the last couple of times out, but that's huge for Bill Watts to come in, because they were building Dr. X with the Verne Gagne story, and now Bill Watts is getting built up in the back end, scoring these victories 3 shows in a row over Dr. X in some way, shape, or form.
Yes. Also on that April 13th, Moto and Arakawa defeated Moose Cholak and Rock Rogowski. So that's pretty good for Rock. A few months and he's in the main event with Moose in Chicago.
Right. Yeah, we saw him work
also that night,
with Bill Watts in a match, tag match as well. So, yeah, definitely pushing Ole pretty quickly here.
Yes. Lanza beat Igor. Wilbur Snyder beat a wrestler identified as Black Bart. This is not the Black Bart from Mid-Atlantic.
Right.
17 years later. I have no idea who this actually was. But Savage got a win over Paul Christie. And Prince Pullins, for being a loyal soldier, finally got a victory over Igor Volkov.
We haven't seen Igor here in quite a while. It's good to see him back.
Yes.
Prince Pullins scoring that Horowitz win at the beginning of the show.
Yeah, Prince had a legit, he was a security guard at an Indianapolis pawn shop. You know, he had a great physique and got a lot of mileage with his association with Bruiser and Snyder. Okay, here's the big bout now. May 4th, 1968. AWA champion defeats Dr. X in the second of two bouts.
That's Verne Gagne over Dr. X. So the story we began at the end of last year in 67, it culminates here in May of 60. We get about 6 months out of the story, though.
Yeah, who knows what, you know, it isn't like we have Verne Gagne's calendar, or booking calendar to look at.
Right.
But also on this, Bruiser, we had another matchup between Bruiser and Crusher against Moto and Arakawa, the second of four. And Bruiser and Crusher won on disqualification.
Okay.
Bruiser's payoff was $1,550. We had Pat O'Connor defeating Johnny Powers, Dutch Savage over Rene Goulet, Big K over Prince Pullins, and the Assassin over Santiago Acosta. So that was May 4th, 1968. On June 1st, 1968, we had matchup number 3, where Bruiser and Crusher lost to Moto and Arakawa. I didn't see it, but I wonder if salt was involved. That was a typical gimmick used.
The ceremonial salt, absolutely.
Yes. Bruiser's payoff was $1,800. This feud drew when he's getting, that's the same payoff he got for sellouts the previous year. Now, also on the card, Dr. X beat Mighty Igor via disqualification. Watts drew Larry Hennig Harley Race over Rene Goulet. Now you see Hennig's back after his knee injury. Blackjack Lanza defeated Luke Brown, whose real name was Carl Dennis Campbell, most famous with the Kentuckians and Grizzly Smith. Dutch Savage defeated Johnny Case. Well, for the 2.5 years since the Chicago Wrestling Club, the ticket prices have remained the same. We didn't have that much inflation yet, and they've added a kids' half-price ticket. There was a physical ticket office at 212 North Michigan Avenue, and this was a prequel to Ticketmaster, you know, where you go and you have them print the tickets.
Right.
This company, Ticket Central, was decades later acquired by Ticketmaster in their quest to dominate the ticket and live event world. Hey, at this time, Bob Luce started a 24-hour telephone hotline, which basically was a phone answering machine with a 1-minute cassette tape where you could record a message. And the fans, and I used to do this. I used to call this up within an hour after an amphitheater card ended. It was 729-4080, 729-4866.
So
you call the number.
Would you get results and things of that nature, or
not the results?
Okay.
But you know, you'd hit, like, for instance, if I would call after an amphitheater card, you'd hit Bob Luce. It would go something like this. Hey, fans, our next amphitheater card will be July 27th at the International Amphitheater Friday night. And we're bringing back Bruiser and Crusher against Moto and Arakawa after that cheap, dirty win by the Japanese team earlier tonight. So he would talk about the new card and reveal what happened to set up that card.
So Chicago in general was really ahead of their time between, the precursor to Ticketmaster and the 24-hour hotline where you're kind of building it. You can actually call and listen to them promoting the next show. You don't have to wait for the TV. You don't have to wait for the newspaper ad. Not that they had a lot of those, but they're really just ahead of their time. And Bob Luce can't be credited enough for his ideas and, the way he pitched things. But wow, it's just fantastic, man. I really wish I had been able to be there for this stuff.
It was. And sometimes I wonder, how did he do this so fast?
Right.
Because, I figured, okay, the card's going to be over around 11 o'clock on the... Well, you know what he did? He probably audio taped it before the card even happened.
Right. Yeah.
I was saying, ma'am, how can the card's not even over yet?
Yeah.
I was just questioning this. Boy, they didn't have... How does he do this results thing so quick? I was, let's see, 11 years old.
Well, there was no cell phones back then. If you were at the arena, you weren't making the phone call yet. So, it works out.
So the next card, June 29th, 1968. Moto and Arakawa beat Wilbur Snyder and Moose Cholak. The program said, in bold letters by Bob Luce, Snyder and Cholak have a surprise in store for the Japs. Well, I don't,
Yeah.
That was just hype for a program. Lanza beat Pat O'Connor. He's a former NWA champion.
Yes, absolutely.
So that was a feather in the hat of Lanza.
Absolutely.
Mighty Igor beat Pafo. Luke Brown beat Tiny Mills. Princess Little Cloud over Cora Combs. Igor Volkov drew Doug Gilbert. Bruiser was paid $275, and he was not on the card that night. But I'm sure that all added up. And at this time, the TV time slot was changed from Friday night, 9 p.m., to Sunday morning at 11 a.m. And this was for the WWA taping.
Okay.
The one from Indianapolis.
Yes.
Hosted by Chuck Marlowe. They also had AWA programming on Monday and Wednesday nights. So, but yeah, they switched timing here.
Okay.
So our next card, big card now, July 27th, 1968, and the program, bold letters, no TV. Well, they never had TV. They never had any TV in the 1960s here. But AWA champion defeated Blackjack Lanza. Lanza finally gets his title shot against his trainer, and it was one of the biggest bouts so far. And I remember there was magazine coverage of this with Lanza executing a pile driver to Verne. But Verne successfully defeated his title, and that was probably Lanza's one of his biggest payoffs in his young career.
They did a great job building Lanza up for the first half of the year just to get here to the summer and finally earn that. And literally, if you're following the story, earning this title shot with all the victories and matches he had incurred over the course of the first half of 68. Unfortunately, just not enough to beat Verne Gagne yet.
No. Also on the card, Moto and Arakawa went to a no contest against Watts and Gagne, who will tag up again later on, which we will see. Mad Dog beat Doug Savage, Moose over Big K. They brought back the midgets again. Lord Littlebrook, Wee Willie Wilson, Little Beaver, and the Mighty Atom, and Angelo Poffo over Bob Boyer.
Real quick correction here. You said Arakawa and Moto defeated, it was Bill Watson Snyder. You said Watson Gagne. In case anybody's keeping score and track and writing these results down for their own purposes, I just wanted to make sure we got that straight.
Now, the next card was pretty soon, 2 weeks later, August 10th, 1968. Now, there was a smaller exhibition room within the amphitheater called Donovan Hall.
Okay.
It was a large, flat exhibition room without bleachers or balconies. There were actually pillars every 20 feet or so holding up the ceiling. Mm-hmm. This was not the ideal wrestling place. and Rich Tito called it a terrible place for wrestling.
Okay.
But it was the only venue available because the Democratic National Convention was scheduled for the amphitheater on August 26th and 27th. That became famous in American political history as Hubert Humphrey was nominated inside the hall, but the hippies and versus the police fought on the streets, which was covered on film by national media.
Mm-hmm.
But they did run the card at Donovan Hall. Dr. X beat Snyder. The Crusher beat Mad Dog. The Watts beat Harley Race. Blackjack beat Dutch Savage. And Angelo Poffo beat Frankie Lane, who was a Canadian cowboy character.
Mm-hmm. And
then finally, Moose Cholak over Johnny Case. So they had to keep wrestling going.
Right.
And they would unfortunately have to use this Donovan Hall.
I mean, you look at the card. It's not like they're throwing, junk out here while they're waiting to get back into the amphitheater. Though you got Dr. X back against Snyder, Crusher, and Mad Dog Vachon, Bill Watts, and Harley Race. So it was a good card.
And it was that room. It was just a flat room with, I'm just guessing, 30 rows of folding chairs.
Right. Yeah, I see in your notes, no bleachers, no balconies. It's all straight, flat, level seating. So that's not fun for the people in the back row. But I mean, I guess you got to keep the business going. Even a political war of sorts here cannot stop Chicago wrestling.
Yes. The next card, we went ahead. The amphitheater was now available on September 7th, 1968. Dr. X beat Wilbur Snyder on disqualification. They brought back Bruiser and Crusher to defeat the Devil's duo, Poffo and Markoff. Larry Hennig defeated Bob Heisinger, who was a one-hit wonder in Chicago. He later used the name Baron von Heisinger in St. Louis and Kansas City. Harley Race over Frankie Lane. Moose won on countout against Luke Brown. And we have a debut on the Chicago Wrestling Club this night. Billy Red Lyons from Toronto beat Big K. And many people then, I don't think anybody knew that he was the brother-in-law to Dick Beyer, Dr. X. Both of them used the figure 4 leg lock, but that was a debut for Lyons, and we will see him in tag team developments on future shows. Mm-hmm. Also on September 7th, Moose Cholak beat the Assassin.
Keep the big moose on the card? That's very good.
Yes. Well, that was, he lived, in the city limits on the southeast side. That was a great gig for him.
No doubt.
Yeah, and he could manage his family's bar, and then later he worked for the city of Chicago as a patronage worker. So that was typical. We've talked about wrestlers with their real jobs.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, next we go September 28th, 1968. The Crusher beat Dr. X on disqualification. So that's good. They both got in a main event. Larry Hennig and Harley Race were reunited against Dick the Bruiser and, get this, Wee Willie Wilson, a midget wrestler.
Do you know the story behind
I know
this?
sometimes he would have Heenan as his partner. So this had to be Bruiser's doing. Bruiser's payoff was $1,440. Bob Geigel was brought in against Sonny Myers, who was a regular employee of Bob Geigel in Kansas City. Paul Christie beat the Assassin on this card on September 28th.
So there was no major angle in regards to how Wee Willie Wilson becomes partners with Dick the Bruiser to work the former World Tag Team Champions. Okay, I'm just curious.
My educated guess, Hennig and Race ganged up on Bruiser. So what's a good way for Bruiser to get revenge on the next card? Bring in the Crusher.
There you go.
And that was the main event on November 2nd, 1968. Mm-hmm. Larry Hennig and Harley Race. This was after they lost their belts.
Right.
Brought back the feud with Bruiser and Crusher.
I'm glad they brought this back.
Yes. Hennig and Race won on disqualification. Probably Bruiser or Crusher lost control. Bruiser's payoff was $15.50. Watts over Dr. Moto in a singles match. Lanza beat Paul Christie. Moose beat Johnny Case. Markoff over Luke Brown. Jose Betancourt beat Tiny Mills. This was towards the end of Mills' career. He was an AWA tag champ, earlier in the decade. Okay, November 23rd, 1968. They brought back Verne Gagne versus Blackjack Lanza. That ended. Verne won via countout. And, of course, it helps for a card to have Dick the Bruiser and the Crusher getting their revenge against Hennig and Race. Yes, more tag team mayhem. Bruiser's payoff was $19.50. And we also had on the card Edward Carpentier beating Mitsu. Watts over Mike Riker. Pampero Firpo.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, against Fernando Stamos and Paul Christie over Prince Pons.
Okay. So Pampero Firpo has invaded the Chicago town, at least for this card. Yeah, okay. Very good.
Yes. Now, okay, the next card. Monumental results. Okay. December 28th, 1968. Dick the Bruiser and the Crusher beat Mitsu Arakawa and Dr. Moto to win the AWA tag titles. During the promotional material during this time, Crusher was called the Judge.
Okay.
He would, on his interview, he'd say, "Here come the Judge." That was a rap song from those days that was on television's Rowan and Martin Laugh-In. So there was already built-in, produced, and manufactured "Here Come the Judge" merchandise.
Okay.
So Crusher decided to assume the "Here Come the Judge," and of course the merchandise was not originated by the Crusher, but he sort of assumed that identity. I never heard of a gimmick table, but I remember people saying they were selling "Here Come the Judge" caps and pennants, that kind of thing at the amphitheater.
You got to capitalize on that. And just to kind of put that in context, too, that song got released in 1968, so it was extremely timely as it was happening, as it was hitting the TV airwaves and things of that nature. So, yeah, Here Comes the Judge. And later on, for just a very brief cup of coffee, we've been covering that, me and Jamie Ward in the Mid-South 82. Carl Cox is back for a brief little run there, and he comes out to that theme, which does not fit Carl Cox at all, but Here Comes the Judge anyway.
So this was a big card. Bruiser's payoff was $2,085. That was the best payoff since the Chicago Wrestling Club started in 1968. So all that built-up animosity drew a big crowd wanting Bruiser and Crusher to win. And I remember Crusher saying, "Now we threw these two coolies and got them out of the way. We're going to the geisha houses and celebrate." Also on this card, Dr. X beat Moose, and Moose also wrestled against Lanza. Someone must have no-showed. Louis Martinez over Chris Markoff. Prince Polens drew Johnny Case. Angelo Poffo over Mike Boyer. And Mike Mulhouse that beat Bob Sabre. I should mention Bob Sabre, though. He was a wrestling magazine photographer, a trainer, and most famously, the character of George Ringo, the wrestling Beatle.
Okay, the wrestling Beatle.
Who in 1964, during the British invasion, wore a wig and graced preliminary matches in the Chicago Wrestling Club and the WWA.
I like the hybrid name. George Ringo took two of the Beatles there. Very good.
And of course, the Chicago Wrestling Club was really making a name for itself. On December 21st, the Chicago Tribune reporter, Frank Mastro, who covered boxing, pointed out that for the first 13 of 14 cards for the Chicago Wrestling Club, those cards grossed $324,000.
Okay.
Attracted 111,000 fans. And of course, the state of Illinois got 10% of the box office for their amusement tax for doing nothing. These political guys would just sit at ringside and, but anyway, that was an average attendance of 8,500 fans, and the average gross almost $25,000. Wow. They sure made amazing progress since the dark days of Jack Pfeffer, who lost $9,000 on 7 nights in the second half of 1963. So now the Chicago Wrestling Club is back. A lot of good stuff in store for the near future.
Lots of long-term booking, lots of development of stars. The Dr. X character is, I guess you could say, I don't want to say born in Chicago, but certainly utilized in Chicago through the AWA storylines. Bill Watts is rising. Rogowski, the future Ole Anderson. Jack Lanza becomes Blackjack Lanza. Just lots of great talent coming through here. And the entire year builds to that end of the year program. Chicago's hometown heroes finally take the belts back, Crusher and Bruiser. So all is right in the world as we end the year of 1968. What a great time to be a fan.
And there will be excellent new talent, especially in the tag team world, in 1969 at the Chicago Wrestling Club.
I'm looking forward to that.
Such as the Chain Gang, Red Lions and Red Bastille, and Mad Dog and Butcher Vachon.
Oh, yeah. That
so lots in store for
sounds
1969.
Looking forward to it. Keep them wanting more, Richard. Absolutely, guys. When we return, we'll be covering more of the 1960s, closing out the year 69, and if time permits, maybe even move into the 1970s next time around here in the Chicago Wrestling Club project as part of Regional Rasslin. We're going to wrap things up this week, guys. So, Richard, I want to thank you so much for taking the time out and doing the research and putting these notes together, and I'm looking very much forward to seeing where we go from now. There's lots of great tag teams coming in, it sounds like, so can't wait to see where we head in the year of 1969. But Richard, thank you so much for being here and doing this with us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. See you soon.